So good evening, everyone. I'm Nicolas Baddour. I run the Publicis operations. I co-run the Publicis operations in Switzerland and run the Publicis operations in Lausanne. Our Lausanne office is the office for Publicis that runs all global brands based in Switzerland. And our main clients today are Nestlé, GSK, Philip Morris, and a couple of Swiss-based brands for the Swiss market. But we're not going to talk about this today at all. We're going to talk about something a lot more interesting. I'm going to talk about the behind the scenes of story branding. And so the reason why I felt this was an interesting topic to share with this group today is because we changed completely the way we were building brands in the last few years. Why? Because everything is changing. And so the way old school agencies used to develop brands through above the line campaigns, I mean, TV campaigns, print campaigns, outdoor campaigns, is not relevant anymore. People are touched by touch points that are all over them. We used to say that a single individual is touched 5,000 times a day. Now I think we're closer to 50,000 times a day by a message trying to sell something, whether it is a good or an idea or a trend or anything else. And so everything is changing. Obviously, business is changing. In the last 12 months, business changed more than since the Second World War. We saw a shift from brick and mortar to online that has never been seen before. Obviously, thanks to the coronavirus crisis, but not only. The infrastructure was already there. The industries are changing. The industries moved to Asia, are coming back to Europe, and the nature of Europe's industry heartland changed. So everything is changing, actually. Technology is changing, and it will change more. I keep betting with some of my clients that between now and 2050, some of us will already be living on another planet. Some of us will have traveled all the way there and will be able to live long enough to make it there and live there. That's how fast technology is changing today. And media is changing. Media used to be a couple of people talking to the masses, and now it's everybody talking to everybody. Maybe that's too much, but that's the reality. So because of that change, marketing had to change and had to dramatically change. Marketing, as I discovered it 25 years ago, was very simple. It was about coming up with award-winning TVCs or award-winning print ads. Today, when you're a brand like Adidas, you're not competing against Nike or Puma. You're competing against all the brands that are starting to talk to your market, to your target audience. That means that Adidas is competing with Nike, obviously, but is also competing with PlayStation, is competing with IKEA, is competing with a Snickers bar, is competing with music, is competing with anything that can make you spend the $100 bill you used to have for a pair of shoes, and actually not spend all of it, but start spending a fraction of it. Because the minute you spend a fraction of it, you don't have enough money anymore to buy your pair of Adidas shoes. So Adidas is competing with the whole world. Nike, same story. And so that dramatically changed marketing. It moved from something that should grab your attention in 30 seconds to something that should keep your attention all the time. And so our method to master change had to change. And while some of us were lucky enough years ago to be working on big brands, what used to be, so in the 90s, it used to be cool to work on Apple or PlayStation or one of those sports brands. In France, it was cool to work on Club Med. You basically had a couple of maybe 10 brands per market that were cool brands, big brands that everybody knew. Today, there's a lot more of those, and therefore the competition is a lot tougher. And how to build those brands? Well, you have to build them not anymore through one big piece of communication a year, but a collection, an endless collection of small moments. And to do that, imagine when I'm talking about a large collection of small moments, we now have to build content studios for big brands. A content studio for a global brand can build up to 10, 15, sometimes 20,000 pieces of communication per year, from a film to a tweet, to an Instagram post, to a print ad, to anything that a brand will use to touch a consumer, anything. So try to imagine how many things this means. And the secret in order to control what that brand says is a North Star, identifying what is the North Star that will guide all marketing decisions, that will inspire all communications. That North Star needs to be created by a group of people. And then that North Star is brought to life by what sometimes we call an editorial team. And I like to describe it sometimes as, this is an editorial line, like you used to have in a TV channel or a news magazine. The editorial line that guides what kind of reportage or what kind of articles can run in that magazine or can run on that TV channel, because they convey the message this channel wants to convey. They convey the message this brand wants to convey. So we're talking about the North Star that guides all marketing decisions. I spoke about small moments. There's a huge collection of them. We can create up to 15 to 20,000 of them a year for a global brand. They don't all run in a single market, but you can have up to 1,000 that run in one single market. And any one of those touch points has to impact and resonate with people. None of those touch points or none of those moments can convey the wrong message. The smallest message, if wrong or conveyed at the right moment, can destroy an image. Why? Because you all experienced in the last few years a brand communicating something, wrong timing, and suddenly the social medias take over that small moments and turn it into something huge, and that brand image is destroyed. So again, your North Star is what will guide all the decisions and what will serve to measure whether a message is right or not. Big brands. So a brand today is like a good story. A good brand is like a good story. And well, what makes a good story? What makes a good story, according to Hollywood, and this has been the case since the creation of Hollywood, is a combination of two things. On one side, what made the recipe of Aristotle's pity, fear, catharsis, and the journey of Beethoven, suffering, struggle, overcoming. And when you combine those two and you build a story in 3 acts made of a setup, all movies start with a setup. You understand from the beginning, who are the protagonists, where is this happening, what is the context, which period this is happening, etc. Then, usually the second act, there's a confrontation. Something happens. Something bad, something good, something happens. And so it sets, you've set the context and it sets the situation, and fast forward, the resolution. Usually those 3 acts are always there. And that's the secret of a good story, according to Hollywood, according to Bollywood, according to Cinecittà, according to the movie industry. So we took them, and those same 3-act storytelling structure can be used to define a brand, and to define a brand in communication today. And we call this story branding. So what's story branding? It's a high-level brand strategy that captures the sweet spot between the brand DNA, the product strength, and the consumer attention. Let me break that out. The brand DNA is what started that brand, is what was at the very beginning, is what made that brand relevant, different, interesting. And in the brand DNA, you don't have a million different elements. We will see with a few examples later on what a good brand has in its DNA. Nike, for example, in their DNA, they do the best sports equipment there is to help you exercise, and to make sure you're not using your equipment as an excuse to not exercise. But we'll come back to this. Product strength. If I stick to Nike, well, if they do the best equipment, then they have to explain why. What is the product strength? So they started in running, and they had the best shoe to run long. It was a shoe that didn't create blisters, that didn't wear out, that held your foot. It was the best running shoe ever built in the beginning. And the consumer tension, and again, we will develop that a bit further, but the consumer tension, Nike realized at the time that people didn't exercise as much as they could, although they all had potential. And the reason why they didn't exercise as much is because, I don't know if some of you are as old as I am and exercised in the 80s, but running in the 80s was not cool, because you always had friction, and your shoes were bad, the tissues, the material of your running shorts or t-shirts created chafing, and the equipment got in the way. And so I was using this in order to say, oh, no, I'm not doing this today. I'm not going skiing because I don't want to come back soaking wet and freezing cold, and I'd rather stay warm. And so the equipment became the reason why not to exercise, and people found all kinds of excuses not to exercise. The outcome of story branding is a brand story. The brand's North Star that guides all strategic marketing decisions and informs other strategic frameworks. So once you've found that North Star, and I will use Apple here as an example. Apple in the late 90s recreated the brand, and the line was think different. Why think different? Because Apple was what we used to call the white computer, the white laptop, versus the black laptop at IBM. But not only the white laptop, it was also the very simple laptop. The laptop, you only needed to touch a button to turn it on. And then it was always very simple to use, very intuitive. And then they were the first company that created those colorful iMacs instead of, still with IBM or HP, that black box. And from that day on, Apple Think Different line became the way they were thinking all their products. Why have a Walkman with a million different tapes when you can have everything in something called an iPod? Why have a complicated MP3 system when you can download everything into one device through one laptop and have all your music handy? So systematically, they were thinking differently, and systematically, they were trying to start from what is the consumer tension, what is the first thing that the consumers are expecting, and build from there, rather than in some organizations, what our geniuses from R&D are developing and finding, and then how are we going to market this to the masses and force whatever innovation was ready to the market. Apple was looking at consumers and understanding what consumers' tensions and expectations were, and then delivering the product that best responded to that. And when you have a line as simple as Think Different, it helps you make the right decisions. If something you're developing is not different, then it's not Apple. I'll give you another example. I used Nike earlier, I will use Adidas now. When Adidas came up with impossible is nothing as a line for the company, it's because historically this company was created by people who thought, right after the Second World War, let's organize an event that will bring the whole world together around one sport, and the sport of football. So one company, Adidas, one newspaper, L'Équipe in France, came together. I'm making a long story short, but came together and thought, okay, let's reinvent the World Cup that had been created before and recreate it in a simpler way with the right material in order for people to gather around one thing and and turn this into a party. And so Adi Dassler at the time created those shoes that were the first football shoes that actually were made to kick a ball. And so the 3 bands were here to reinforce the front of the foot so that you can kick the ball. The ball was suddenly made of material that could survive an entire game, etc. And it became, so the mantra of that guy at the time was, even at the end of a war where everybody fought everyone, it's not impossible for everybody to come together and celebrate the game of football. Impossible is nothing. That line didn't exist at the time, but it was the beginning of that thinking. And through the years, impossible is nothing became what drove the people at Adidas when creating a new project, creating a new product, or helping develop a new competition. And in the years 2000, a group of people came together and thought, oh, that should be the signature of the company. Because what unites all the athletes we have with us is that they all had crazy challenges and they all overcame crazy challenges. And I will give you 4 examples. Muhammad Ali in Zaire, going to Africa and fighting someone who was at the time stronger than him, or he perceived as stronger than him, and then winning. Even stronger, Franz Beckenbauer playing the finals of the World Cup with a broken arm, when a normal person with a broken arm doesn't even consider it. Greece in 2004 winning the European Championship when nobody even knew that Greece was qualified. Haile Gebrselassie, a long-distance runner who beat his own world record, I think it was the 1500 world record, 8 times. 8 times, and no one had done that before. And people were asking, how do you do this? He said, oh, it's very simple. I just imagine where I was on the stadium when I beat my record, and I try to beat myself. And so we did a film about this. Anyway, for Adidas, impossible is nothing was the line. And everything we came up with as a company from that day on had to bring to life the impossible is nothing line. And you can find on YouTube many films. One of them is a film in which at the same time you have running together Zinedine Zidane, David Beckham, Muhammad Ali, Haile Gebrselassie, and a few sportsmen who made the history of Adidas. And we only managed to create that film because of a director called Robert Zemeckis, who had the technology to bring together people from different ages in one film as if they had been acting in that film together. So we had a story for that brand, and we just developed that story over and over and over again. Now let me come back to the 3 acts. Act 1, the setup. So here we're talking Hollywood, and I will show you how the Hollywood technique, we turned it into story branding. The setup in story branding creates empathy for a brand through a consumer-facing belief. It answers the why a brand exists. So remember the word belief. Act 2, the confrontation. The confrontation in story branding identifies the consumer tension that makes your brand relevant to people. And here, remember the word tension. The consumer tension is that thing that the consumers realize or don't realize that they need. And the Act 3 is the resolution. The happy end in story branding is when people buy into your proposition. They go, ah, yes, they're right. I don't want this anymore, or I do need that. I don't want this, I don't want to be in this situation anymore, and therefore I do need to buy this product. And so we turn storytelling into story branding, belief, tension, proposition. And so before going into this, the way we do this, and I will develop this a bit further later on, is we come together in a workshop and we work with the agency people, the brand team, a few markets on what is the belief behind this brand? What is the tension with the consumer? And what is the proposition that will make them go, oh, yes, right, that's what I need. So let's look at a couple of examples. This is the easiest way to get this. The first one is Nike. And so Nike, their belief, and this is true since the beginning of Nike's marketing age, their belief is if you have a body, you're an athlete. That means that everybody's an athlete because everybody has a body. And so the tension is that people always found excuses not to go through with their good intentions to exercise. And all the excuses were valid. It's too cold, it's too warm. My couch is too welcoming. Not the coach. The coach is not welcoming. It's I have blisters, or I'm too skinny, I'm too fat, I didn't eat enough, I ate too much. All good reasons. And so what Nike said to people is just do it. Stop complaining, stop finding excuses, just get out there. And from the beginning, they came up with communications that said that. It said, just get out there, do it. And so now let's look at a few examples. And those examples are interesting because one of them is from the 70s or 80s, and then one of them is more from 2000, and one of them is more recent. So let's look at the film, and we'll come back to this. Oops, I need to run the films from here.
We don't hear the sound, Nicolas.
So I guess that most of people the age of this man will have the right excuse, the perfect excuse not to get out there. I'm too old for this. Well, no, you're never too old for anything. The other film is a film from year 2000. I don't know if everybody remembers, but the big fear before 31st of December 1999 was that at midnight everything would go wrong because the numbers wouldn't, all the computers would go crazy, and that the world would collapse. And so this is a world that did go wrong, but regardless, he went out running. He doesn't care. And the last example, the most touching example, is more recent. It's this one. So as you can see, the same message consistently conveyed by the same brand. It tells you to just get out there and do things. It doesn't always sign its communications, just do it. But that's what the brand means. And by the way, the brand conveys the same message, whatever touch point it's using. So here I'm showing you an example of the app they launched a few years ago, to bring together the community of runners. And so in the beginning, it was just an app where you could download your running, and then it became a community app where you could find people around you who were runners as well, so that you're not running alone. And then it created meetups, and it just grew the community. And usually that app was combined with a store, and the community would meet up in that store, and usually it was a big city, etc. And so what the brand always did is create the products that would push people to get out there and exercise consistently, still today. Another example in a very different category is Nescafé. So the Nescafé story is different, very different. The context of Nescafé is that with coffee connoisseur being available anytime, anywhere, Nescafé was losing relevance as the convenient morning cup. The brand needed to induce new meaning into coffee moments, or Nescafé coffee moments. That was relevant to millennials, but not dependent on coffee quality. So let me develop a little bit. Nescafé have been there forever. And until a few years ago, well, the late 80s or mid 90s, you either went to a cafe, especially in Europe, in Paris or in Rome or in one of those coffee traditional markets, you had a real coffee, or you had an instant coffee. And there were no real options in between. Then Starbucks came in, and you had slightly more sophisticated options. Lattes and cappuccinos and macchiatos, etc. And then Nespresso came in. And so while in the streets you had other options than cafes with Starbucks, at home you had other options than filter coffee or instant coffee with Nespresso, proper coffee. And so slowly but surely Nescafé became that irrelevant coffee experience. Soluble coffee is not premium, is not real coffee, all kind of criticisms. So it had to reinvent itself. And so a few years ago, publicists sat with the Nescafé team because it was really important to reinvent Nescafé without trying to be defensive. We're not going to be Nespresso, we're not going to be Starbucks. We are Nescafé, and we're always going to be Nescafé. So the belief that we came up with is that positive human relationships improve our quality of life. The tension is that it's never been easier to connect today, but it's never been harder to engage. And the proposition is make every cup count. Now, why is Nescafé conveying this message? Because while we have all those other ways of drinking coffee, people still have something like Nescafé in their cupboard. Why? Because it's the simple, quick way to put together a cup of coffee in the morning when you're in a hurry or when you get friends at home. And we realized through market studies that in a lot of markets, Nescafé is part of your coffee mix. You have your Nespresso, you do have your Starbucks, you still go to a cafe to get a cup of coffee, but you also have Nescafé in your cupboard. And what Nescafé does is that it brings you together around a warm cup of coffee that is easy to prepare. And so because it's about human relationships, and because it's about very emotional human relationships, we came up with this idea. So it's all about the relationship and all about those relationships that we can create or recreate around a cup of coffee. My third and last example is a brand a lot of us have heard of. A lot of us never actually bought into. And one of the reasons why is because at some point this brand lost its soul. And we will understand why in a second. Diesel was born to challenge the status quo. So very originally, it was there to challenge that status quo. The status quo being that only American brands can create proper jeans, and Levi's in particular, but not only. But after challenging the status quo, Diesel lost its cool because it tried to adhere to the codes of the premium fashion industry. So to reconnect with its brand DNA, Diesel has had to find a way to make its product values relevant to today's consumer landscape. It was crucial because otherwise the brand was going to die. So again, we followed the same model. It's usually a workshop, and we came up with a belief that says everybody needs some bravery to rise above the ordinary. The tension is the freer the world, the more we trap ourselves in conformity. This is a very important idea, the free world. And think about the world in which we live today. The free world is all about following rules. And it's important to follow rules, but it's also important not to feel trapped by those rules, to feel free, and to feel that we can decide for ourselves. And the proposition, therefore, is success awaits outside the conventional. Now, let's look at how Diesel brought this to life. And it's very interesting because this is a brand that doesn't have millions, like Nike or Adidas or Coca-Cola. They have little money. They produce a few pieces of communications, but they need to make sure that those pieces of communication really stand out. And that those pieces of communication don't just stand out, but get people talking as well. And ideally, talking and sharing. Therefore, beyond the media buying, you have earned media. And by earned media, I mean your communication is so great that people share and talk. And so you earn the fame that your pieces of communication will generate. Let's look at this campaign. There are 3 films. We will only look at 2. You can look at the third one in your spare time. And so it's about going with the flow. And you will understand what we mean by watching that first film. Another film in the same campaign. So again, as I said earlier, the proposition here is success awaits outside the conventional. So here we're talking about the beauty conventions. Everybody has to be perfect in order to be perceived as beautiful. Well, Diesel says no. Your differences are what make you beautiful, and they celebrate that. And I think it's a beautiful message. But conventions can also be somewhere else. And so here we will see a completely different example, same brand. It's not a film. They created an event and they turned it into a case study film. And let's watch it and then we will discuss. So the convention would fight counterfeit. Diesel, instead of doing this, did it their own counterfeit and sold it, and it created that event. So that's a really interesting take on that phenomenon. Now I'm hearing that some of the sound is not working really well. So can someone confirm if you can hear the sound of the films, because the next one without sound won't work.
Hi, Nicolas. No, we can't hear, because this is the problem with Google Meet. If you play the videos on Google Meet, we can only see the picture. There's no sound.
Yeah, exact.
Sorry,
No
I
sound.
couldn't hear anything.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter, but your videos were excellent. So we understood what you were trying to say.
Okay.
But when when you post your slides, then we can go back and watch these videos later.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
so that would be possible. But they are absolutely amazing. It's a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So a few more slides. So I won't present that next video. The next video, you can watch it on your spare time. It's about the Diesel CEO resigning. And so instead, that CEO had done a fantastic job for the organization. And so him resigning was an issue. And instead of going into crisis mode and hiding the resignation and trying to hire someone very quickly in order to cover the issue, Diesel decided to actually post on social medias the search for the successor and turn this into a campaign. And so they turned the crisis into an opportunity. And again, it's going against conventions. You will watch it on your spare time. And since Diesel changed its communication model and adopted that strategy, all the numbers are back in the green, whether it is their image, the perception, the sales. Not sure about this year. I guess that, like a lot of those companies that you're still buying online, probably the numbers are not so bad, but not 100% sure. But until the coronavirus crisis, the situation was fantastic. Now, a few words on how the logistics behind story branding. Story branding is not something you can come up with on your own as an agency. You need to work on this with the brand team, the clients, if you want. And so the best way to do this is organizing a 1 or 1.5 day workshop with the brand team, with the agency leadership team, and from across disciplines, by the way, and some of the key markets. So if you're developing a global campaign and your key markets are the US, China, Italy, for example, you have to have them with you from the beginning in order to take into consideration what those markets expect, what the consumer in those markets expect, what are the business strategies, the challenges, etc. And so during that workshop, you discuss the market situation, the brand DNA, and you make sure you understand very clearly the brand DNA. You understand it not only from the global team, but also from the markets. And you discuss. By understand, you don't just listen. You discuss. You agree to disagree, or you disagree. And you make choices. You cannot have 10,000 ingredients in your DNA. It's 3, 5, 7 tops. You also discuss the consumer profile. Today we talk about profiles called personas. You define the right persona. So for Diesel, for example, who is a Diesel consumer? You cannot have 10 different consumers. You can have 1, 2, worst case scenario, 3 personas, not more. And a persona is a description of your typical consumer. You need to understand the competitive landscape. Who's your competition? The direct, the indirect. We were talking earlier about Nike not just competing with Adidas, but also competing for share of attention with brands outside the sports industry. You need to really understand this, and because this will define where you communicate and what do you communicate and to whom do you communicate. You need to define the role of the product. Is the product central in your communication or not central? I mean, are you developing product campaigns, or are you developing a master brand campaign that features the product? A product campaign is a campaign that features the product strengths. A master brand campaign conveys a master brand message and features the product, but doesn't necessarily talk about the product strengths. You also need to define your tone of voice. Are you funny? Are you serious? Are you pink? Are you black and white? All this needs to be defined. The cultural context, and it goes beyond culture, by the way, the context in which you're living. A campaign developed in 2021 will not be the same as a campaign developed in 2018. We've spent a year locked down at home, so there are things that change culturally. Future outlook. Are people seeing a bright future, a dark future? So what is the outlook, and what do you need to take into consideration to build your brand? Then you do brand building exercises, and as a result of this, you define together the brand story that we were talking about earlier. But what I mean by define brand story, you're not writing the campaign, but you're defining the elements that will serve as a brief to creatives. On day 2, you recap everything you've done on day 1. You build the brand house. And by brand house, I mean, to make it simple, the belief, tension, proposition. This is something you need to agree on at the end of this workshop, because this is your brief. And then you decide where are going to be the applications, the creative applications. So where are you going to play? In films, in social medias, in Chopper. You just need to define this very, very, very clearly. When you leave at the end of that day 2, the brief to your agencies and creatives is clear. It's set in stone, and nobody can discuss it anymore. Because then it is the creative magic that needs to start. And that creative magic is a very, very, very fine balance between clear rules, creativity, and outcome that nobody expects. The best creative makes everybody feel uncomfortable. It gives you goosebumps, but it makes you feel uncomfortable because you're in the unknown. Otherwise, you're developing something that is vanilla and that will not stick. As you could see, the Diesel campaign sticks. The Nescafe film you've seen sticks. The Nike communications. If this doesn't give you goosebumps, nothing will give you goosebumps. And there are many other examples like these. I was talking earlier about small moments. So I won't go deep into this because it's an entire presentation, but by small moments, we mean all those little elements of a communication ecosystem, also called the customer journey, the consumer journey. It has many different names. To make a long story short, a brand can go a consumer can go from unaware, completely unaware about a brand, to aware, kind of, to considering. By considering, I mean, oh, I might need this. To purchasing, I do need this. To using, I'm happy. I thank God I bought this. Let me talk about this to everyone. Or, not really happy. Let me reconsider and maybe not repurchase. Or let me reconsider and maybe purchase. And it's a virtual circle. But that's another topic. Consumer journeys is where you define the touch points where your message will be conveyed. And every medium, every one of those touch points, has its own rules and limitations. Let me take one example. Twitter is one of those touch points. Twitter is about words and a certain number of words or characters. And so there are rules. When you're communicating on Twitter, you know what you can do and what you cannot do. And so you have to think about your message and how to convey it on Twitter. And Twitter, Instagram is another story. It's an image. And it's an image that in 3 seconds needs to convey a message. And ideally, that message needs to be conveyed without sound because people scroll down and don't always listen to the sound of it. And outdoor is something that needs to stick in 3 seconds, even if you have 5,000 outdoors around. So the medium shapes the message. And obviously, one needs to understand the medium to define the message properly. Last but not least, any small moment in your in your communication journey is a chance to make big impact, whether it is good or bad. That's why we have to be very careful about the messages we put out there. Any message can become a bomb. Any message can become famous. And so your editorial line, your brand story, your story branding defines what is your big message. And then it is the agency and the brand team role to decide how to bring this to life per channel and when and everything else. So I hope this gave you an idea of how to create big brands through small moments. That's all for today. And I think we have a few minutes left for questions. In case